Many people see using the left hand as a weakness. In some cultures, the left hand is considered less important than the right hand. People often expect strong warriors and great leaders to use their right hand to fight and lead. Because of this, left-handed people might feel different or even less capable. But what if what seems like a weakness is actually a strength? Sometimes, what people look down on is what God uses for great things. God does not see things the way humans do. He does not choose people based on what the world calls strong or wise. Instead, He looks at the heart. God does not see limitations the way humans do. When people think they are weak, God can make them strong. When people feel unimportant, God can use them for something great. Throughout history, God has chosen people who seemed unlikely to succeed. He picks the youngest, the smallest, the forgotten, and the rejected. For example, Moses thought he could not lead because he was not a good speaker, but God helped him lead Israel out of Egypt. David was just a young shepherd, but God made him a king. Over and over, God has shown that He does not need the strongest or the smartest. He needs people who trust Him. A long time ago, the people of Israel lived in the land God had given them. God had blessed them, but He also gave them rules to follow. These rules were meant to help them live good lives and stay close to Him. But the Israelites did not always listen. At first, the Israelites worshipped God and obeyed Him. But after some time, they forgot about Him and started following the false gods of other nations. They made idols and prayed to them instead of trusting the one true God. Because of this, God allowed their enemies to take control over them. He wanted them to see that turning away from Him would only bring trouble. One of the enemies God allowed to rule over Israel was a king named Eglon. He was the king of Moab, a powerful nation. Eglon saw that Israel was weak, so he gathered his army and attacked them. He did not do this alone. He got help from the Ammonites and Amalekites, two other strong nations. With such a large army, they quickly defeated Israel. One of the first cities Eglon and his army took over was Jericho, the very city God had given to Israel long ago. Jericho was a strong city, but it could not stand against Moab's army. After conquering Jericho, Eglon made sure that the Israelites stayed under his control. He put his soldiers in their towns and made them pay heavy taxes. The people of Israel were no longer free. They had to obey Eglon and do whatever he commanded. For 18 long years, the Israelites suffered under Eglon's rule. He was a harsh king who made their lives difficult. The people worked hard but had little for themselves because they had to give so much to Moab. They had no power to fight back, and they felt hopeless. Finally, the Israelites realized their mistake. They cried out to God, asking Him to help them. They admitted that they had turned away from Him and begged Him to save them from their suffering. God, in His mercy, heard their cries. Even though they had disobeyed Him, He still loved them. He decided to send someone to rescue them, a man named Ehud. This was the beginning of Israel's deliverance from Eglon's rule, and it showed that no matter how far they had fallen, God was always ready to help when they turned back to Him. For 18 years, the Israelites suffered under King Eglon of Moab. They had no freedom, no power, and no way to escape his rule. But even in their suffering, God had not forgotten them. The Israelites finally realized they could not save themselves. They had turned away from God, and now they were paying the price. But instead of continuing in their mistakes, they cried out to God for help. They begged Him to rescue them from their suffering and to give them another chance. God, in His mercy, listened to their prayers. He had always been ready to help them, and now He chose a man to deliver them, someone no one would have expected. The man God chose was named Ehud. He was from the tribe of Benjamin, but there was something different about him. He was left-handed. In those days, being left-handed was not common, and people often saw it as a weakness. Most soldiers trained to fight with their right hand, so left-handed men were not usually seen as strong warriors. But God does not choose people the way the world does. While others might have ignored Ehud, God saw his potential. He was the perfect person for God's plan. Ehud was not a mighty warrior or a famous leader. He was just a man who trusted God and was willing to be used for His purpose. Even though others may have overlooked him, God had chosen him to do something great. Through Ehud, God would show that He can use anyone, no matter how small or different they may seem. The deliverance of Israel was about to begin, and it would come from the most unexpected hero. For years, the Israelites had been forced to serve King Eglon of Moab, paying him heavy taxes and living under his harsh rule. But God had chosen Ehud to deliver his people. Ehud had a plan, and with God's help, he was ready to act. As usual, the Israelites had to bring a tribute, gifts of money, food, and goods, to King Eglon. Ehud was chosen to lead this group and personally present the tribute. The Moabites saw this as a sign that Israel was still under their control, but they had no idea that Ehud had something else in mind. After delivering the tribute, Ehud and the others turned to leave. But before going too far, Ehud sent the rest of the group ahead and returned alone, saying he had a secret message for the king. Ehud had come prepared. Because he was left-handed, he had hidden a small, double-edged dagger on his right side under his clothing. The guards had checked his left side, assuming that's where a warrior would carry a weapon, but they found nothing. This allowed Ehud to enter the king's presence without suspicion. When Ehud told King Eglon that he had a special message, the king became curious. Thinking it was something important, Eglon ordered all his servants to leave the room so he could hear the message in private. Now, alone with the king, Ehud stepped closer. The room was quiet, and Eglon waited for him to speak. But instead of words, Ehud acted. Quickly, Ehud reached with his left hand, pulled out his hidden dagger, and struck the king. The blade was sharp, and Eglon, who was a very large man, fell without making a sound. Ehud left the dagger inside and quickly locked the doors before slipping away. The king's servants waited outside, thinking he was resting. By the time they realized something was wrong and broke in, Ehud had already escaped. He had carried out God's plan. After striking down King Eglon, Ehud knew he had little time before the Moabites discovered what had happened. Thinking quickly, he locked the doors of the king's chamber and slipped out unnoticed. The palace was large, and no one suspected anything was wrong. With calm but steady steps, he made his way out and headed toward the hill country of Ephraim, where the Israelites lived. Meanwhile, King Eglon's servants stood outside his room, waiting. They assumed their master was simply resting or occupied, so they did not disturb him. As time passed, they began to wonder why he was taking so long. Eventually, they gathered their courage and unlocked the doors, only to find their king dead on the floor. Panic spread through the palace. The Moabite officials realized they had been tricked, but by the time they sounded the alarm, Ehud was already far away. The delay had given him the perfect chance to escape. When Ehud reached the Israelite territory, he wasted no time. He blew the trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, calling the warriors of Israel to battle. The people, who had suffered under Moabite rule for so long, answered his call. Armed and ready, they gathered around their unexpected leader. Ehud declared, "Follow me, for the Lord has given Moab into our hands." Encouraged by his bravery and God's promise, the Israelites marched into battle. With their king dead and their forces in disarray, the Moabites stood no chance. The Israelites struck down their oppressors and reclaimed their freedom. By trusting in God and following Ehud's lead, they won a great victory. This battle was not just about defeating an enemy. It was about God proving once again that he hears the cries of his people and delivers them in ways they never expect. The battle was fierce, but the Israelites fought with determination. God was with them, and they overpowered the Moabite soldiers. Every enemy warrior who had oppressed them for years was defeated. Not a single one escaped. The Moabite army, once strong and feared, fell in a single day. The land that had been under their control was now free, and the Israelites rejoiced. With Moab's defeat, Israel was no longer under foreign rule. They had fought for their freedom, and God had given them victory. After the battle, Ehud became a respected leader among the Israelites. Under his leadership, the nation enjoyed peace for 80 years, a time of rest and prosperity. Ehud's story reminds us that God can use anyone to bring about change. Even when the situation seems hopeless, God has a plan. Through one left-handed man, he saved an entire nation and showed that no enemy is too strong when God is on our side. With the Moabites defeated and their army completely destroyed, Israel was finally free. The years of suffering under King Eglon were over, and a new chapter began for God's people. After the battle, the Israelites no longer had to fear Moabite rule. The heavy taxes and forced labor were gone. They could farm their own land, raise their families in peace, and worship God without oppression. The Moabites, once a powerful enemy, were now too weak to threaten Israel again. Their defeat was complete, and their influence over Israel was broken. The people celebrated their freedom, knowing that God had heard their cries and saved them through Ehud. The story of Ehud is more than just a tale of victory. It teaches us important lessons about how God works in unexpected ways. Ehud was not the kind of person most people would have chosen as a leader. He was left-handed, which was rare and often looked down upon in his time. But God does not choose people based on what the world sees. He looks at the heart. Many times in the Bible, God chooses unlikely people to do great things. Moses, who was afraid to speak, became the leader of Israel. David, a young shepherd, defeated the giant Goliath. The disciples of Jesus were ordinary fishermen, but they spread the gospel to the world. Ehud's story reminds us that God can use anyone, no matter their background or abilities. If we trust him, he can do great things through us. Ehud could have been afraid to face King Eglon. He could have doubted himself or given up, but instead, he acted with boldness and faith, knowing that God was with him. Sometimes, God calls us to step out in faith, even when it seems scary. Whether it's standing up for what is right, sharing our faith, or trusting God in difficult times, we can learn from Ehud's courage. His story reminds us that victory does not come from our own strength, but from trusting and obeying God. When we walk in faith, he gives us the courage and strength we need. Ehud could have doubted himself. He was not a mighty warrior, and others may have looked down on him for being different. But instead of letting fear stop him, he chose to trust God's plan. Many times we face situations that seem too big for us. We might feel unqualified, too weak, or afraid of failure. But God does not ask us to be perfect. He asks us to trust him. When we put our faith in God, he gives us the courage to move forward, just like he did for Ehud. The world often sees weakness as a disadvantage, but in God's hands it becomes a strength. Ehud's left-handedness was not a mistake. It was part of God's plan. What seemed like a limitation allowed him to defeat Israel's enemy. In the same way, our weaknesses do not disqualify us from being used by God. Instead, they remind us to depend on him. When we feel weak, God's power can shine through us even more. As the Bible says in 2 Corinthians 12 verse 9, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." God had a purpose for Ehud, and he has a purpose for each of us. Sometimes that purpose might seem scary or too big for us to handle. But just like Ehud, we must take a step of faith. When God calls us to do something, we should not let fear hold us back. When we feel unworthy, we should remember that God equips those he calls. When we face challenges, we should trust that God is leading us. Ehud's story is proof that when we trust in God, he will guide us to victory. No matter who we are or what we face, God can use us for his glory. Just like Ehud, we all have moments of doubt and fear. But God reminds us that he is bigger than our weaknesses. If we trust him, he will give us the strength, wisdom, and courage to fulfill his purpose in our lives. So today, let's choose to trust in God. Let's step forward in faith, knowing that he is with us, just as he was with Ehud. As we come to the end of Ehud's story, let's take a moment to reflect on what we've learned. Ehud was not the strongest or most expected hero, but God used him to bring victory. Just like Ehud, we may face challenges that seem too big, but with God, nothing is impossible. No matter what challenges we face, we can trust that God has a plan for us. He sees beyond our weaknesses and gives us strength. Just like he raised up Ehud to free Israel, he can use us to make a difference in the world. If you ever feel unsure or afraid, remember, God is with you. He sees your potential, and he will guide you. If you enjoyed Ehud's story and want to hear more stories of faith, courage, and God's power, be sure to stick around. There are many more amazing Bible stories to explore. What did you learn from Ehud's story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. And don't forget, if you trust in God, he can do great things through you. See you in the next story.